Hello, guys and gals, me Mutahar, and ladies and gentlemen, there's been a lot of goofy stuff that I talked about this week, some fun video game nonsense, but sometimes we have to just come back to reality and talk about what really is a scary future for human beings. And the reason I mention it is because right now you have a chance to fight back, okay? You really do. Now, I talked about chat control like a couple months ago, and I showed you guys this cool program called Cleopatra where you can take your messages and you can encrypt them and send them in these blocks of encrypted globs and just share them with your homies. Basically, provided you follow all the rules appropriately, nobody should be able to see your messages except you and the person you send them to. That involves criminals, that involves people you don't like, that also involves the goddamn feds, okay? Now, I'm not a huge fan of the feds anymore. Like, recently, I would say, I have been very disillusioned by the government. I've been very disillusioned by federal agencies. I feel like a lot of these agencies care more about reducing our freedoms and personal privacy rather than actually helping anything, right? I mean, you got all those crazy, files, the Epstein files that haven't even, dropped properly. You've got all, it seems to me that the people in power are the ones that are always a priority, and the average Andy who's sitting just trying to live their life has to be peeked in by Big Brother every day. Now, again, I could put the tinfoil hat on, but I'll actually use facts and logic to show you what's the fucking problem here. Now, a couple months ago, I talked about this thing called chat control. Now, chat control is something that's happening in the EU, and you might be like, but Muta, you're not from the European Union, why do you care? Well, I'll be real with you, the EU is one of the largest zones economically influentially around the world. Chances are, if something passes in the goddamn EU, there's a good chance politicians and scumbags that we unfortunately somehow elect in bring that over to Canada, bring that over to the United States, bring that over to Australia. In fact, speaking of Australia, do you guys know that they've just added a whole bunch of sites to the ban list? Now, you might be like, well, Muta, isn't banning children from social media good? In theory, you would think, yeah, reducing children's social media allowance might actually be a good thing. But how do you verify if somebody is a child or an adult? Well, you take their identification. But you might be like, even then, Muta, why can't they just VPN to other parts of the world? And the reality of it is, that is true. And then the politicians are also targeting that. For instance, in the US, in Wisconsin. You may not know of this act, but a bill prohibits business entities from knowingly and intentionally publishing or distributing harmful information to minors on the internet on a website that contains a substantial portion of such material. Now, that initially people were like, oh, that probably means the hub, right? Which makes sense, right? But it can also extend to places like Reddit, places like X, places like YouTube. Any social media platform that effectively allows user-generated content could possibly fall into the purview of this nonsense. And of course, the bill also requires a business entity that knowingly and intentionally publishes or distributes material harmful to minors on the internet from a website that contains a substantial portion of such material to prevent persons from accessing the website from an internet protocol address or IP address range that is linked to or known to be a VPN system or provider. So again, not every site is the hub. There's a lot of sites that kind of intermix, and some sites do different things to age verify and age gate material. But when I read where, again, you want to make it illegal for certain websites to knowingly allow VPNs or anything of that nature, basically undermining, one of the tools that people use for just basic internet anonymity is, again, it's showing me that this is a war on every fucking front, okay? But to go back to the chat control stuff, right? Now, again, I want to start off by saying that we all care about the kids. I'm sure everyone watching this video, I'm sure you guys all care about children. Nobody in the comment section to this video is going to go, actually, fuck them kids, all right? Quite nobody, I think, is going to say it. And even if you mean that, you're probably not going to say it in the comment section as people just spam it. Anyways, the point is, this is a argument that a lot of these politicians and governments use, like, hey, we care about the kids, right? We just want to protect children from nasty people, bad behavior, so let us scan your phone, let us scan your messages, because ultimately we're just there to protect the kids after all. It's kind of like a Trojan horse into, again, mass surveillance. Again, I care about children. I think all of us do. But let's not throw the baby out with the fucking bathwater here, and let's not ignore the fact that if the governments of the world really cared about these children, then there would be a lot more focus put towards human traffickers and their files that still remain completely sealed off, and their crimes and the people that they work with still just roaming around the world, right? You know, if the government really cared about that, that would be a focus. But really, it's always just, can we find a way to watch what you do without your consent, right? Can we just surveil on the masses? You know, it's like 9/11 was bad. Terrorism was scary. But you know what? It allowed the government to fearmonger the shit out of people so that eventually scanning your emails, scanning your social medias, running an entire surveillance campaign on the people just became normalized for a little bit. So for anybody that doesn't know, chat control is basically legislation that makes it possible for a tech company like Google or Meta to scan the user's accounts for CSAM material. Now, the reason why chat control kind of gets brought into it is because ultimately the focus is on stopping things like CSAM from spreading, which is a very noble goal. So Ashton Kutcher gives this big speech to EU Parliament members in support of the Commission's content scanning proposal. Kutcher has been very active in the technical debate. I didn't know that Kutcher was like an expert here around client-side scanning. He's the co-founder of an organization called Thorn, which aims to develop cryptographic technology to enable content scanning. So, for instance, this is what Thorn looks like. Obviously, on their website, they're very much, there to protect the children. And what Thorn is talking about is something that, Apple has sort of dabbled into. A lot of platforms have really done to, where they use hashes to calculate if CSAM is in people's photographs. And the way that it works is when you take a photograph of somebody, right, things are calculated as hashes, different things. And, even if you use Photoshop to modify CSAM material into something that is unrecognizable, because everything is effectively hashes, a lot of detection platforms like YouTube CSAI or Microsoft's PhotoDNA will detect that hash, and then they will, compare that to a hash that is in the NCMEC database, which is known CSAM hashes. And if something matches in the database, then an alarm gets tripped, and then obviously law enforcement that is relevant to the area and jurisdiction then gets involved. So this is not something that's entirely new. It's been happening for quite a while. But now with chat control, they want to basically take away a lot of the encryption guardrails that we really do need in order to keep our privacy, right? Encryption is important. If you take away encryption, or you basically allow governments to have backdoors into encryption, then it makes the encryption system completely useless. You can't have encryption if there exists a third key that allows you to open the actual locks and see the contents of the material. Encryption only works when it is between the sender and the receiver and vice versa. That's it. If you undermine it, then you don't have security. Simple as that. So when Ashton Kutcher decided to bring this up, another individual from the EU, a Commissioner Eva Johansson, came and then presented a legislative proposal that was called the Initial Chat Control, which basically allowed, again, the citizens that to have their phones and computers basically scanned. So any conversation that they were having, encrypted or otherwise, could be scanned. And of course, when people had said, yeah, this sounds like mass surveillance, she would just literally go up and say that that was a smear campaign, right? Basically, what she wanted to do was scan people's personal information. And again, she had billed it like, hey, it's like a drug sniffing dog, right? Like, when you go to an airport, the the dog walks by your luggage, sniffs and sits down if it detects drugs or anything, right? The reality, it's not like that. Again, it's having everyone's personal information and correspondence out there for any of these agencies to grab and read. And it's not just, if you trip a flag, they de-encrypt your actual messages and read. No, it literally leads into a situation that I'm about to talk about where, again, mass surveillance, where they use AIs and shit, starts becoming a norm. Now, in a very recent look into chat control, obviously one of the things that kind of sparked up was a write-up by Patrick Breyer, who actually focused on chat control 2.0. Again, it's constantly coming back. They're just constantly throwing this bill to make sure that it eventually gets passed, even with some changes that really don't amount to keeping our privacy. Look, it's an all or nothing situation. You either have encryption, you either have your personal privacy, or you just let mass surveillance run you. And you might be like, well, Muda, it's okay, right? The government knows everything about me. That is the kind of logic that they want you to have. They want you to have a defeatist mentality. As long as you have the ability to encrypt your stuff and protect yourself on the great World Wide Web, as long as you have operating systems that literally do not have back doors into like federal agencies, you do have a level of privacy that you can keep, right? There's no reason, right? Like, it's kind of like saying, hey, listen, leave your door unlocked. People already know, like, it's just crazy. Like, do you leave your door unlocked? Do you let people come into your house and watch every single thing that you do? No, you expect that there is some level of privacy, there's some level of respect that you should have as a human being, some right that belongs to you. So Dr. Breyer says the EU is playing us for fools and they're scanning our texts and banning teens. So again, there are 3 poison pills, according to him, in this new compromise proposal that you can read for yourself that brings issues into this situation. One of them is that apparently it is mandatory chat control. So a loophole in Article 4 of the new draft obliges providers of emails, chat, and messenger services like WhatsApp, really, it could be anything. It could even be iMessage, could be whatever, to take all appropriate risk mitigation measures, which means they can still be forced to scan all private messages, including end-to-end encrypted services. So the loophole renders the much-praised removal of detection orders worthless and negates their supposed voluntary nature. Even client-side scanning on our smartphones could soon become mandatory. The end of secure encryption. That's one man's quote. Then the next pill comes into a total surveillance. So basically, at this point, it gives them the ability to scan photos, videos, and links with algorithms and artificial intelligences. So he writes where no AI can reliably distinguish between a flirt, sarcasm, and criminal grooming, explains Breyer, which actually makes sense. And to give you an idea of why the AI stuff can be super duper scary is because now anybody can take your entire chat messages and throw them into an artificial intelligence. And you can do this for yourself. You can take your whole chat transcript, throw it into something like ChatGPT or Google Gemini or whatever, and have it, basically scan the chat for you, pick out key summarizations, or identify what people are talking about. And, to an extent, it also works with photographs and videos too. Have you ever taken a photo, right, and seen it automatically back up to the iCloud or Google's cloud, and then give it a couple minutes, and you can actually search for things in that photo? It's because an AI looks through the photo and points out key details. For instance, if a photo has some gamer subs, all right, or some tubs, you could probably type this in, maybe get a result. You might be able to identify and say man sitting on a chair, and it might actually bring up the photo of a man sitting on a chair. There's a lot of ways that these modern platforms use artificial intelligence to make your life a little easier. But of course, ultimately, it's these scanning mechanisms that lead to some pretty scary outcomes. For instance, at one point, Google had actually refused to reinstate a man's account after it wrongly flagged medical images he took of his son's groin. So in this instance, right, this is a story where a man was literally asked by his doctor to take photos of his kids, private parts, so that they can send it for, again, medical reasons, right? It's one of the only few reasons you should ever to taking photos and sending things like that. It was a very medical reason, right? It was a very good faith reason in this case, right? Very, very good faith. It was a medical thing. But unfortunately, the AI doesn't really have the context. It doesn't know. It's going to look at the photo of the genitals and be like, that's not right. That shouldn't be there, and immediately ban you. At some point when you get banned for accounts like this, they'll just straight up tell you that you got banned for CSAM, and really nobody else is supposed to think differently, right? What Google or any of these platforms has done is outright just completely slander your public image. And, you can't blame anybody else for thinking, wow, this guy might be a predator. I mean, his account got banned for something that filthy. The cops are showing up to your house asking you all kinds of crazy questions. And, it's going to take you not weeks, not days, but months to clear your name off of something that an AI deemed you bad. Now, of course, if you look at things like chat control, I could guarantee you, right? There's going to be a lot of times where people's chat messages, people's flirtations with each other, people's sexual advances, the way people talk, whatever, just photos, videos, might get wrongly flagged. No AI system is perfect. And unfortunately, when you allow them into mass scanning territory, it's just the false flags that you're going to get especially within what they're looking for here, are already going to be bad 10 times over, right? But of course, ultimately, the end of the day too, one of them is that it ends anonymous communication. So again, every citizen, because again, they want to identify if people are minors or not, would have to present their identification or have their face scanned to open an email messenger or account. That is the creepiest part. Again, it's not just this. Most social media platforms in the EU, the UK are now, or Australia, are now kind of forcing you to like take photos of your identification front and back, send an image of your selfie, and then like, have yourself processed as being an adult. And we've already seen bad things where people's driver's licenses, especially on Discord, have been leaked. In fact, that big Discord leak that actually happened, turns out a whole chunk of those driver's licenses were from Australia, a place where this kind of law was actually mandated. A lot of these politicians and like government agencies, it's either they don't know what they're doing because they don't understand the technology, or they do understand the technology and they realize that, listen, we're going into this new world. We're going into a very internet-connected world, more so than we've ever had before. And now everyone in the world is connected. Everyone in the world has the ability to use private messaging to have, the internet used on their terms. And of course, I don't think many people in the elite, many government agencies, many people want it. And what pisses me off a lot about this kind of shit is that this is meant to target the average person. No politician, nobody in the elite class is ever going to be subject to this bullshit, okay? They're very much in the upper echelon of society. What this does affect is the average person like me or you. The very little that people have, the very little freedoms that you have, are ultimately yoinked from you and just basically taken. Like, you are nothing but cattle to these people. And that's one of the reasons why I'm against things like chat control. Like, obviously, when you look at it for 5 minutes, you think, wow, it's about protecting children. And then you look at it for 10 minutes and it's like, actually, it's more about fucking mass surveillance. It's more about taking away our privacy. And it's more about putting people in the crosshairs than they've ever been expected before. Look, you should not be going to jail for something that you don't intentionally mean. And look, are there bad people that could be caught through this? Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure something like this could be used to catch terrorists, criminals, predators, some of the worst people in society. But again, I feel like law enforcement should be operating within the laws rather than try to legislate the ability to like fucking completely get rid of the guardrails and just mass surveil individuals. You should not be throwing, again, the baby out with the bathwater, okay? These people should be able to do their jobs, but ultimately we as a society cannot just give up our privacies and our fucking freedoms and the little things that we have so that the fucking elite or the government agencies at the top can just freely invade every single aspect of our life, Again, trying to leave from like artificial intelligence tools that, I laugh at, like Copilot, like I can easily decouple myself from that. But when it comes to chat messaging services like Signal, that I use to communicate with friends, family, sometimes, just really anybody. I don't want people looking into that information. I don't want to look into anybody else's information, and vice versa. I want the little bit of privacy and the little bit of freedoms that I have. And it seems like the government cannot stop trying to fucking jam their noses into my life, into your life, into anybody's life, really, okay? It's fucking stupid shit. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. And you know what? Before I end this video off, you might be like, what is the actual fix here? The actual fix is learning how to communicate privately with things like Cleopatra and like, OpenPGP. But the other thing is, if you're an EU resident, please call your representative and tell them you don't want this dog shit in, okay? That's about it. That's literally all you can do. You gotta at least try. Because if you don't try now, then in 10 years from now, you'll be living in a fucking surveillance state. And you'll be acting on the internet with like complete fear, okay? Because at any moment, Big Brother can come and knock on your fucking door, and for something that you posted, something that you said, something that you like joked about. It's crazy shit, man. And again, I'm not trying to like fearmonger anybody here. I'm not trying to like conspiracy bait. I'm just telling you that getting rid of your basic encryption and rights oftentimes will lead to worse outcomes. There's never a good reason, in my opinion, for the government to just be willy-nilly sniffing in your emails, your text messages, looking through your photos, your private life, without any warrant whatsoever, by the way. But yeah, this is me, Muda, and I'm out.